Hello and welcome to Health Matters on Channels Television. Thanks for joining us. I am Mary Alale Yusuf. Learning disorders, sometimes called learning disabilities, appear as notable difficulties in the acquisition and use of listening, speaking, reading, and other abilities. They affect the brain's ability to receive, process, store, respond to, and communicate information. Experts say learning disorders are not caused by economic constraints or differences in cultural beliefs, nor are they a result of inadequate exposure to education. The most common of these conditions, dyslexia, according to Dyslexia International, affects about 1 in 10 or 20 people worldwide to some degree. To explore this topic further, with me is Ben Aripo, chairman of the Dyslexia Foundation in Lagos. But just before we begin to speak, let's take a break.
As a mom and also an expert, I have always protected my family against cavities. But I also worry about stains, and bad breath too. That's why I've helped develop new Pt.1 Triple Protection 1, 2, 3. 1. It helps protect against cavities. 2. Stains. And 3. Bad breath. Now my family is triple protected with new Pt.1 Triple Protection 1, 2, 3.
Welcome back, and you're welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, is it right to say then that someone who is dyslexic will not know how to speak well, will not know how to read well, will not know how to sort things out in the brain? Is that what dyslexia is all about?
No, I would disagree with the first one. In fact, on the contrary, dyslexics are very oratory. They have the power of oratory and they speak very well. They can speak well. The challenge comes with when they have to spell, write, or read.
Okay, spelling.
It's a language-based disorder. Dyslexia is a language-based disorder. So it is about learning the language and learning to read in English and learning to write in English.
Or whatever language, because this is all over the world. It could be Chinese.
Absolutely. But for now, the research has focused so much on English language. So we deal with English language because this is one of the questions someone had asked me about. Does it affect children learning the local languages? And I said the research is still out and we haven't concluded the research.
So this is all very new?
Yeah, all this is all very new.
What causes dyslexia?
There are majorly two basic causes of dyslexia. One is genetic. It runs in the families. It runs in some families. So you meet a condition that someone has had it. And of course, you know, with gene, it could be that 4th generation, 5th generation grandparents could have had it. And somehow...
And then it just pops up again one day.
It just pops up one day. Yeah, that's one of them. The second cause is about traumatic brain injury, when the brain has been traumatically injured by any kind of...
Are we talking about an accident here?
An accident could be one of it. I mean, in my son's case, as I would mention later on, in my son's case, it came because he was crossing the road at the age of 4 to see, the mother was going to see off someone, and then he crossed the road unknown to her that he was coming behind, and was hit by a bike. And
but could this also be caused by an internal brain injury, like maybe in the womb, for example?
Yeah, okay. we've seen actually one of the other things that I want to mention is that we've had neonatal brain damage as well. We've seen neonatal brain damage, and in that situation, then when the child grows up, he would more likely be dyslexic.
Okay,
apart from other conditions.
Are we saying then that a dyslexic is retarded? Is that it?
No, I would not. You see, professionally speaking, I will not say a dyslexic is retarded. A dyslexic is very good at what he does.
Okay.
The only challenge they have, and the disorder has to do with just use of language. And now, would you say, sorry to mention names, would you say Richard Braxton is retarded?
He's a very brilliant man. That's
exactly. But he's dyslexic. But he's dyslexic. Now, his dyslexia has reached a point where he uses creativity in dyslexia. He gave us what we call today voice recognition software, because he realized that he had a shortcoming, and so had to ask Microsoft and Apple, hey guys, how can I work without really getting someone to always write for me. And
so it's not an intelligence problem.
It is not an intelligence problem. On the contrary, all dyslexics are above average intelligence. All dyslexics.
Yet there's a problem.
The problem is
language.
with reading, writing, comprehension, spelling. That's where the problem is. Dyslexics are very good architects. They are very good marketers. They are very good entrepreneurs, generally speaking. Of course, to be entrepreneur means you'll be creative, very creative. That's why they wander away. That's why they leave the space of comfort where you and I are, and go into daydreaming. Now, but don't forget that dyslexia is often also accompanied with weak cognitive skills. That's where the challenge is. It's not them. Then it moves from just being a language-based disorder to other cognitive skills, like inability to calculate.
But there's a problem here.
Yeah.
We have established that a dyslexic could be very intelligent,
yes,
very creative,
yes,
but he still has to express himself through certain media.
Yeah.
And going through school is an important factor in his life.
That's right.
So the problem now is, how do they get to learn to express themselves, to recognize those words, to read, write, spell? I want to ask you, at what stage, when it's genetic, when it's hereditary, at what stage does it usually affect the child?
It will start from the age of 2 or even earlier. Every child is expected to start speaking at a particular age, maybe the age of 1 or 2 years old. One of the symptoms or signs of dyslexia is that this child might have a delay in speech. There might be a delay in the onset of speech. And when the speech comes, it may not be fluent speech. Now, that's one sign. The second sign is that the child starts reversing letters, writes D for B and 9 for 6. So you begin to see letter reversals. So when you begin to see those signs, as early as that, class teachers will recognize it. They will see it and say, this child is reversing their letters. Parents will know that because the child is delayed in speech. Sometimes they're not able to even read at the age of their mates or their peers. So those are easy signs you will see. Now, but one thing is they are so confident. They are fluent in spoken speech. They have good speaking English. But the problem, especially when they get to 5, 6, 7 years age, then the problem becomes when you begin to then subject them to translate their thoughts into writing, because you're now asking them to move from just listening, which is auditory, to writing, which is actually now a language-based thing. Writing is a challenge for most dyslexics.
That could be a problem when it comes to exams.
Even learning itself, exams are a problem, which is why you find in some schools, when the child has been discovered to have this kind of learning disability, teachers have learned to accommodate them. There's something we call accommodation. In other words, instead of giving him the exam paper to read and to write out his thoughts, you read a question to him.
Okay.
He writes.
Now, I'm in a family, let's say of 3 or 4. Could you have all normal, in quote, children, and then just one dyslexic?
Now, let me take my case, if you don't mind. I have 3 kids to the glory of God. The first is very smart and bright. In fact, my first 2, my boy and my girl, are very smart and bright. They made us often not go to Parent-Teacher Association meetings or prize winning, because they always win the prize, and then his classmates will say normal things. So, and then comes this last one. At the age of 9, I realized that he was unable to read.
And was he showing all these symptoms?
He was showing all those signs.
Reversing letters.
Exactly. My wife will complain at the point, and of course men are always the last to come on this. My wife will complain, this boy is not meeting his developmental milestones. And I said, don't worry, you're comparing him with the first or his sister. No 2 kids are the same. Don't forget my background is psychology and I know all these things about that. So I said he would catch up. I always believed he would catch up. But little did I know that he had a disability which came as a result of that bike accident.
But I can just see parents beating the child about, slapping the child about, because he looks dumb.
Exactly. And I did the same too. The first time I was with my son, when I discovered this, when he was 9, now he's 13, I was helping him to revise his work to go for exam on Monday. And we were working on, and I realized he wasn't reading. So I said, okay, let's do a simple exercise, spell house. And he goes, K. Of course, my natural reaction was to slap. And I said, no, I mean house. He said, oh, M, what you do again? You get a stick this time, because the first was a slap.
Okay, now, What do you do with a child who is having such a problem?
You seek a solution, which I did.
Can it be solved?
Of course, dyslexia is not a disease. This is the mistake parents make. They think that, oh, dyslexia is not a disease, it's a disorder, it's a disability. And so if you find it early, if early detection is important, and early treatment, early intervention, treatment here meaning intervention, intervening in such a way that the child is able to get help from specialists. The point is that we all think we know everything. No, there are certain things we don't know, especially when a child comes, when you recognize the conditions, the signs I've mentioned. Of course, again, not to confuse the issues, there are over 50 signs of dyslexia. There are over 30 signs of other disabilities. So you need a professional diagnosis.
You need a professional
diagnosis.
So a parent on his own cannot say, I believe this child is dyslexic.
No.
How about all those symptoms you mentioned of spelling backwards, changing letters?
It's not enough. I mean, now
so
there's a lot of information.
A child could have those problems and not be dyslexic.
It may not be dyslexia. It may just be weak cognitive skills. Again, that's another thing altogether. Well, okay. I have just, in the past 2 weeks, assessed some children who had weak cognitive skills, and they're not dyslexic.
Okay, now, do they have degrees of this problem? Yeah. Are there some that are less, some that are more?
Yeah. Again, as we say professionally, dyslexia is a spectrum disorder. It goes from mild, moderate to severe. So that's why we say it's not possible for parents to just say, okay, I've came to the internet, I've seen the symptoms, and I'm just saying, oh, I've seen 3 or 5 of them, and so I conclude. No, because it's a spectrum. You don't know whether a child is mild, whether it's moderate or severe. And depending on what area of the spectrum the child is, that's why you decide the interventions on the basis of that. So professional intervention, professional analysis and diagnosis is very important before you can come to a conclusion. Okay. Because there are other conditions that show similar signs and symptoms. So in order not to confuse them, so you take the child or the person to a particular specialist.
So no matter what you see, there has to be a professional diagnosis for the child.
Yes, please, again, I'd like to correct this because we are saying again child. In recent times,
it happens to adults too.
Of course.
Is it that it happens to adults, or
they grow with it?
They just didn't notice it?
They noticed it.
And the child grew up with it?
They noticed it. They didn't know what it is. They grew with it. We're dealing with certain adults right now.
So it is a childhood onset problem?
Exactly. And then you grow with it.
Is there anything that can be done in the stage of pregnancy to prevent or reduce the incidence of this kind of thing?
Well, now you're talking of genetic engineering. If one notices, if you notice that your family dispositions or your heredity, your family disposition shows that there is one particular person in the family tree that is dyslexic, then it might be worthwhile to try to pre-select or favorably select someone.
But nothing like changing your diet,
no.
taking some medication and all that stuff.
In fact, one of the things we say to parents is that medication may not be the best option.
Okay, let's just stop there for a while and take a short break. We're going to take a short break and we're back right after the break. Be ready